I think we're just looking for something different, a different place to go to photograph people, really. And you know, the countryside, we love the countryside, so it was an ideal place to go. Judy found it, didn't you, on the trip, and that was in 2018, wasn't it? 2019.
So Judy, what was it that appealed about Romania?
Just that it's the last, one of the last remaining almost medieval peasant communities, and fascinating to see that, to understand how the whole system worked and what their values were.
So how did you find out about that?
Well, it took a lot of Google searching, really. I was searching for documentary photography trips, and not specifically Romania to start with. We didn't really want to go to the Far East or anywhere, and yeah, just sort of stumbled upon it really and thought, this sounds really good. I wanted a really small group. A lot of them take 12 photographers, and I just couldn't see how that could work really, that we were going to get the depth of understanding that we wanted with that number of people. So this group was a maximum of 4 participants, and I thought that's ideal. In fact, there were 3 participants and the guide, and it was a great experience.
Yeah, and we really hit it off with the guide and got on really well with him, and you know, we decided we were going to go back as soon as we could, and then COVID came along, which delayed that, so it was not until this summer that we could go back again, which was nice. It's the first time we went out in the autumn, and this was to go out in the summer, so we saw all the haymaking and everything else, which was lovely. And the way they just live hand to mouth, really. They're still subsistence farming. They've got perhaps a cow if they're very lucky, and a couple of pigs and some chickens. And they till their own little plot of land, and that's how they survive.
If they haven't got family that can help them, they just survive somehow, you know? But then some of the people have survived through a lot worse.
Some of my brothers, the Russians called them in Hungary and put them in Siberia in prison. And let them die of hunger.
So why do they live like that in what is, after all, the European community?
Well, it's the government, really. They're not that well looked after. They don't care about them up in the mountains. They're pretty remote, a lot of these people. You know, we drive for miles long tracks to find people up in the mountains, and some of the tracks are pretty bad, you know. And they've got no transport. Horse and cart is the main transport if they're lucky to have enough to have a horse. That's their only means of transport, a lot of them, if they've got transport. Otherwise, they walk, you know, and you just see loads of people just walking, old people walking along the roads to go to get some provisions or whatever.
They haven't really got a choice, have they?
No.
Because if they could find a way to a city, then they'd be homeless and have no income. So the best option for them is to carry on with this sort of subsistence farming. And try and eke out some sort of survival that way.
And it's clear from the pictures that a lot of the people are the old people who can't make that move to the city.
It is, yeah. And they're still living in these sort of huts with mud floors, no electricity, no running water, you know, and they're still living like that, you know, and How they manage, I don't know. I mean, wood for their fires to keep them warm is an issue, because if they can't cut it themselves, they've got to pay for it somehow.
But there she was in her 80s,
Yeah,
chopping logs.
yeah,
She said she had to start saving now, in this autumn, for next year's firewood. Otherwise she wouldn't survive the winter, because the houses aren't well insulated either. Obviously they're, you know, quite simple dwellings. And I was amazed. She said she was tired because she'd spent the day chopping these logs into a suitable size to go into her fireplace. And sometimes though, there's this, I think because of what they've lived through, and because during the communist regime, the Communist Party seized all the animals of people who were small farmers and put them all on a big collective farm, and then made people work on that farm. Because now they've got their own sort of freedom to have their own animals, and they've got their own small plot of land. That's hugely precious to them.
Another old day, we walked up the mountains to a place. There was no road, no proper, just a very unworn path up to a house. You would never know a house was up there. And we got up there and she had absolutely nothing. She had I don't know, a dozen tomatoes and some walnuts. And she insisted that we had 5 tomatoes and half of walnuts to take away with us. And walking down the mountain, leaving her with nothing, we just felt awful. But she wanted to, such generous people, they want to give you whatever they've got, you know, and share it with you. And sometimes it's just so humbling and heartbreaking at times.
There is a great tradition of hospitality in that kind of community.
There is,
isn't there?
yeah, there is, tremendous. I mean, the old couple that we visited again this last trip.
So they have like 6 cows, and he said I would keep even more of them, but I can't anymore. It's too much for me.
They had nothing because they weren't going to kill their pig until Christmas. They got no meat until Christmas, and you know, we're October, you know, and she had some pickled vegetables from the summer, and she had potatoes, and she insisted on cooking us a big pot of potatoes. She wouldn't let us go without eating, and she just cooked these potatoes, so we had a dish of potatoes. That was it, you know. But I mean, that's all she had, so you know.
That was one of the best opportunities we had, really, because we decided on this last trip that we wanted to spend longer with people. Rather than go in and talk to them for an hour and perhaps have a coffee and then leave, we wanted to try and spend half a day with people and follow them in their day. And we managed to do that with this couple. And soon enough, they just got to the state where they carried on and ignored us.
Yeah.
And we were, you know, and she'd do the washing up and sweep the floor, and he'd be mucking out the cow shed. And then after a while, she sat down and I sat next to her, and we just had sort of quiet time where nobody said anything. And it was great to experience that. And I think they really appreciated the company as well.
Give me an idea of how remote it is. You fly into Bucharest.
Bucharest, yeah. Then
It's a 10-hour drive.
10-hour drive
North.
And the roads just get smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Although
but
surprisingly,
you're
some of them
surprisingly how
are
close,
better than ours.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised actually how close some of these villages are to quite a large town, but they're still completely cut off. You've got no transport, and so you think that you're going to have to drive for, you know, 20, 30 miles into the mountain to find a remote village, but actually sometimes they're only 5 miles away. But people still haven't got the transport to get to and fro, so they're left quite isolated, aren't they?
While you're talking, I'm trying to make a comparison with North Devon, what, 30 years ago, 50 years ago?
Yeah.
75? How many years ago?
Oh, 100 with some of the places we go to. It's got I mean, they're still cutting hay with a scythe, they're still making haystacks. We saw an ox cart going along the road. Some have got a little bit more and might have a rotavator to rotivate their garden, but in general they're digging by hand, they're doing everything by hand, you know, and still, you know, some have got electricity, some haven't. The water comes from a well or a spring, you know, so it's pretty basic. I mean, it is like, you know, like the village here's got wells and things, you know, which were used years ago, and it's the same. There's wells in the villages that people use communally or whatever. So, and you know, that's used to water the cattle and sheep and goats and whatever as well. So,
I think it probably would be about 100 years ago, because
it's got to be. Yeah,
so few
you're
of them
going
have
back at least.
tractors or anything, you know, or
No. Yeah, there was one chap up on the mountain we stopped to see, and he got quite a large herd of cows actually, but he builds 130 haystacks a year.
yeah,
You
by
know,
hand.
by hand, cuts it with a scythe, rakes
Yeah.
it all up, turns it, dries it, and makes haystacks. Does 130 a year to feed his cows, but there's no money for the milk. They get about, it works out a few pence a litre, doesn't it? Is all they'll get, because it's so remote for anybody to come and collect the milk. It's just not viable. So he feeds the milk to pigs, rears the pigs and slaughters and sells the pigs on. Which he's doing okay. He's got quite a bit of land and a big herd of cows, but he's still got to do 130 haystacks a year on his own, you know, to make that work, you know, which is a horrendous amount of work.
It's just relentless, really.
Yeah,
You can't. I can't express how much admiration I had for that old couple and the way that they just constantly thought about what job they had to do next. There was no concept of really sitting down for a rest much, you know, and they're in their late 80s, and it's humbling, really, you know, and also going up to some of the houses, we just really struggled to get up there, didn't we? And some of the kids are walking up there twice a day.
Why struggle?
We struggled because we weren't fit enough, because it was such a
steep inclines up the
Yeah.
mountains to get up through the pastures and everything else, and
It's
such a long way as well.
Such a long way.
To where they're living, and then when we get up there, they got no water. And they did have electricity because the church actually supplied them with a solar panel. They got one battery and a solar panel which would do a light for them, basically.
A light and
but,
some phone.
You know, they're still living without fridges in hot weather. It's really hot out there. So, and they're still having to live without fridges or freezers. So they're preserving meat by putting it in pork fat and things, and you know, doing stuff that would have been done in this country a long time ago. You know, so
basically, quite often these houses have 2 rooms.
The bigger room.
And at night, the family just splits themselves between the 2 rooms, and they sleep on sofas or whatever, or beds that actually are propped up with logs, and it's a very basic lifestyle. And faith is quite important as well. That's all part of the tradition.
very strong religious culture. We're not particularly religious, but we can sort of see their point of view because they've got nothing else to hang on to. And when you're in a cabin in the mountain, it's dark, and you've got no TV, no lights. You know, it's a long nights in the winter. And it's their faith that keeps them going, because I think they'd just give up otherwise. They do walk miles and miles and miles to go to religious ceremonies in the churches. And you can see the strength in that, you know, and the ceremonies are really lovely because they, unlike our ceremonies, they have the ceremony, then afterwards all the villagers bring food. There's loads of homemade palinka going around, so everybody's having a drink or two, and it's a real social occasion for them. And it's great, and the kids have got that lovely sort of, still got that innocence about them. They're still very respectful to their friends and to the adults. You know, there's just so lovely. You know, it's like they must have been donkeys years ago. You know, and they're just such lovely kids. It's very refreshing to actually find the children that are still living a relatively innocent life that hasn't really been spoiled by maternity, really.
And they all dress up for these ceremonies.
In traditional costumes.
Because textile production is quite a key part of the female culture.
Yeah.
And they still knit socks and
Do lots of embroidery and
blankets.
So when you come away, do you think, oh God, I hope the 21st century catches up with them for their sake? Or do you think, I hope they stay?
That's a very,
that's
very
a very
difficult
good
question.
question.
It is.
I mean, it would be great. It would be great if they could be supported to live a better life where they are, and it wouldn't cost a fortune to do that.
No.
And it is almost unbelievable that they live in that state in the European Union. So what they really want and what I would like for them is some employment, some concerted effort to generate some sort of economy in that area.
The trouble is, tourism, I think, would spoil it.
You know, they have to go where the work is, and that's Western Europe. But there's a huge amount of potential there.
So the answer to that question, should they be brought into the 21st century or left in blissful isolation?
Well, they do need to be brought into the 21st century, but in a way that respects their traditions, if that's possible.
I mean, it's the older people that can't go abroad and work that are really suffering, because they are just left to their own devices, you know, and that is really tough for them. So it's difficult to predict which way it's going to go out there, really. I mean, when these older people die off, you know, what's going to happen? Quite often when they die off, their houses are burnt.
So you're documenting a lifestyle that may simply not be there in
20 years. Yeah.
10 years.
10 years possibly. Yeah.
And should it be mourned when it's gone?
Yes.
Yes.
I think so.
Because
Well, I think because just their knowledge will disappear. That how they preserving their food and how they're actually looking after their livestock, which is in most parts really well, you know, and it's that sort of, I don't know, it's a whole culture.
It's the whole
will be gone.
culture. It's the fact that they live so sustainably and successfully on so little in a rural environment. And have their faith and their traditions, which means that the culture is very valuable and almost more valuable than some of the culture I see here, in that it seems to be more genuine and more altruistic and more humanist than the society that we are part of. And so that's what I would mourn, really.
I think that sense of community as well, and that is gone. Whereas, you know, you go around to somebody's house and suddenly the neighbours turn up with some food and they sit down and start having not exactly a party, but a meal together and a drink and a chat and whatever, and it's just completely, you know, just a normal sort of, they got these outside kitchens which they use in the summer, and they just sort of pile in and it might be because we're there and share whatever they have, you know, and you know, it's just, that's how it goes on, you know. It's really nice way of living, actually, apart from the harshness of it for the older people, really. Yeah.